Now, President Trump is considering options against Iran, with some reports that the U.S. could attack within days. It's believed a targeted strike on security forces could be used to create a change in leadership following a crackdown on protesters, killing thousands of people. Trump has warned Tehran to come to the table and negotiate a nuclear deal or risk further attacks. We can now go live to Washington to speak to Iranian-American journalist Negar Mortazavi, host of Iran podcast and senior fellow at Center for International Policy. Thank you so much for joining me. Great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. Reports suggest international officials are visiting Washington today or this week at some point to discuss the possible strikes on Iran. What can we expect from these talks and the delegations in Washington?
Well, I think we're still at a fork in the road. It's not 100% clear if military action is the path President Trump is taking. His comments and signals that he's sending still indicates that he's interested in diplomacy and a deal with Iran. The Iranians are also signaling that they would prefer the diplomatic path over military action, but the problem is that there's a wide gap between the two sides as far as what they would even agree to sit at the table and talk about. So I think that's a fork in the road where mediators, many of the neighbors, are trying to sort of step in because they're also worried about this conflict getting spilling outside of Iran's borders. The Saudis, Qataris, Omanis, Iraqis, Turks all have signaled their concern, and some of them are trying to sort of step in and mediate and prevent this military escalation. But that's also very much one option in front of the president, and it's possible that he would take that if he doesn't see diplomacy working for him.
And Russia is urging restraint between the U.S. and Iran, warning it could create regional chaos. Will we see the Trump administration listen to these warnings ahead of military action?
Well, so far they have. I mean, the president has shown restraint since the first time that he posted on Truth Social that the U.S. was locked and loaded to attack Iran. He talked about the killing of the protesters. And since then, we've seen sort of a moderation of the tone, or at least the stance. But of course, the military asset, the transfer to the region, shows that the U.S. is locked and loaded. Still not clear if this will be enacted. And also, I think on the other side, the Iranian side has also shown very seriousness in their threat to hit back and potentially escalate this time even more harder than June when Israel attacked Iran and then the U.S. joined. The Iranians have shown that they're willing to go much further than they did last time, potentially hit U.S. bases across the region in many of these Arab countries, their neighbors, and also to hit Israel. And I think that has also given a pause both to Washington, and also we've seen reporting from Israeli leaders as well.
And let's just talk a little bit about what's happening inside of Iran. It's extremely difficult to get any accurate information out, but doctors inside of Iran have now been speaking to other news networks like Sky News, and they've been sharing these extremely disturbing accounts of the government crackdown in Iran. Has the climate of fear been restored following the protests that we did see over a few weeks ago?
Well, the protests, they were massive, and they pose a very serious domestic challenge to the Islamic Republic, to the Iranian system. And they were met with a very deadly, severe crackdown. Essentially, they used whatever capacity they could of violence and arms to try to crack down on the protests. And so far, they've succeeded. The protests have slowed down. We don't see much going on the street. And also, there's sort of a securitized atmosphere post-protest. Many have been injured, many arrested. Their fate is still unclear, how the courts will go, if they will have any due process, or as we've seen past precedent, there will be sort of a post-crackdown phase of further sort of pressure on the protesters and also on the Iranian civil society and various political factions that are seen as challenging the state.
And just in the last half an hour, just before I came on air, we did see the European Union has added Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard to its terrorist list in response to Tehran's deadly crackdown on protests in recent weeks. Iran's foreign minister says Europe is making a major strategic mistake. What do you make of Europe stepping forward and making this move ahead of possible U.S. military strikes that we've been talking about?
Well, this is seen as an escalation, certainly by Tehran, because this is seen as a prelude to whatever military action is going to be taken. Although the Revolutionary Guards have been listed as a terrorist organization before by the U.S., and that's what most matters, because that's where the military engagement is, if it happens, is going to be determining the path forward. But I think Europe has once again made an escalatory move. They haven't been very helpful in the diplomatic path in the past couple of years with the reimposing of the snapback sanctions and really taking a very hawkish stance, sometimes even more harder than Washington. When Washington was trying to do outreach and diplomacy with Tehran, the Europeans were taking a more hard stance. And I think this is just one more step in that direction from Tehran's viewpoint.
And a lot of people have been wondering, if the U.S. does strike Iran, how will they conduct these strikes? Because there's a lot of concern, obviously, Iran, Tehran, there's civilians involved. Will there be more targeted strikes we can expect from the U.S., or is there any indication of how this could possibly play out?
Well, the U.S. military, the world's mightiest military, has a lot of options. It's a toolbox full of all kinds of options, small and big. But the question is, what is the goal? Because the goal, first of all, is not very clear. And also, it's not necessarily that you have all these tools that are going to deliver that goal for you. We have to look at the precedent of U.S. military action in the region: Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria. The goals were presented as nation building, bringing democracy, even women's rights, and many of these. And the military toolbox doesn't really deliver any of that. So it can certainly deliver chaos, destruction, potentially a change in the system, or a very severe blow. But as far as a better future, as far as governance, more democracy, and what the protesters really want on the ground in Iran, I just don't know if that's going to be helpful. And precedent shows that it hasn't been in the past.
And just a quick final thought. Sorry, don't have much time left. But right now in Iran, it seems like the Iranian government still has the support of the military apparatus. Do you think there's been enough weakening there to see U.S. strikes as effective, or could it just galvanize Tehran even more and the government to say, look, it is us against the U.S.?
It's a key point, actually. So the state does have a social base. They're not operating on zero support. Yes, there's a lot of dissent and opposition, but they also have a social base, and they brought their social base to the streets after they cracked down on the protests. So that's one important point. And then also, exactly as you said, the armed forces, the security forces, the IRGC, we haven't seen any serious defections in any of these. We didn't see that in June during the war, and we didn't see it during these protests. And that's a very important indicator if you want to deliver sort of a failed state situation that you can attack from the outside. That's an important factor that just hasn't been observed in Iran.
Negar Mortazavi, it's been brilliant to have you on the show. Thank you for your analysis.
Thank you for having me.